Let me ask you something that should make your blood run cold. The FBI has DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. DNA that does not belong to Nancy, does not belong to her family, and does not belong to anyone who ever had legitimate access to that house. It is sitting in a laboratory in Florida right now. Scientists are working on it around the clock. And yet, 39 days after an 84-year-old great-grandmother was taken from her home in the dead of night, that DNA has not produced a single name. Not because the science does not work, not because investigators are not trying, but because of a single devastating word that a sheriff used in a press conference that stopped the entire nation cold. Challenges. What kind of challenges? What does that actually mean? And here's the question that is keeping forensic scientists, FBI agents, and true crime investigators awake at night. Is it possible that whoever took Nancy Guthrie knew enough about DNA evidence to deliberately compromise the sample they left behind? Because if the answer to that question is yes, then we are dealing with a level of criminal sophistication that changes everything we thought we knew about this case. Nancy Guthrie vanished on February 1, 2026. Within days, FBI evidence response team members were on their hands and knees in and around her Catalina Frail's home, collecting every biological sample they could find. Blood, skin cells, hair, fibers, every microscopic trace of the person or persons who had been inside that house. And they found something significant. DNA, recovered from multiple locations in and around the property that did not match Nancy Guthrie, her 3 children, their spouses, or any of the people who had worked at her home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos was careful and precise in how he described it. Mixed DNA, a forensic sample containing the genetic material of more than one person, which is common at crime scenes, but significantly more complex to analyze. He told reporters plainly, "We believe that we may have some DNA there that may be our suspect, but we won't know that until that DNA is separated, sorted out, maybe admitted to CODIS, maybe through genetic genealogy." That statement alone should have been the beginning of the end for whoever took Nancy Guthrie, because DNA does not lie, DNA does not forget, and the science available to investigators in 2026 is more powerful than it has ever been in the history of criminal investigation. First question for you right now. When you heard that the DNA came back with challenges instead of a clean result, what was your immediate reaction? Relief for the suspect? Frustration with the investigation? Or something else entirely? Drop your answer in the comments. February 2026, March 2026. Tucson, Arizona, and a private forensic lab in Florida. Here is the complete DNA evidence story, every development, every setback, and every reason why investigators still believe this science will eventually crack the case wide open. Step 1. Collection. FBI evidence response team members spent days combing Nancy Guthrie's property. A black glove found approximately 1.5 miles from her home was recovered and sent for analysis. It appeared to match the gloves worn by the masked suspect in the doorbell camera footage. Additional biological evidence was collected from inside the residence itself. The specific locations have not been publicly disclosed, but Sheriff Nanos confirmed multiple samples were recovered. Step 2. The CODIS search. The DNA profiles were submitted to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, containing nearly 27 million profiles, including more than 19 million from convicted criminals. The result? No match. The suspect, if their DNA was indeed among the samples, has either never been convicted of a crime or was arrested in a state that does not require DNA collection upon arrest. A dead end, but not the end of the road. Step 3. The Florida lab controversy. Here is where the investigation took a turn that nobody expected, and that created a very public and very bitter dispute. Instead of sending the DNA samples directly to the FBI's world-class laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, the Pima County Sheriff's Department sent them to a private contracted lab in Florida called DNA Labs International. Othram, a Texas-based forensic genetic genealogy company that was instrumental in identifying Brian Kohberger in the Idaho murders case, was furious. Othram co-founder Kristen Middleman called the decision devastating. She told Fox News, "DNA Labs International is a traditional forensic lab that consumes evidence to make an STR profile. I don't understand why it didn't go to Quantico, since they can do this better and faster than anyone, and they have a pipeline to flip it immediately to inferring identity." Sheriff Nanos defended the decision, saying he wanted all evidence examined at the same lab to avoid conflicts and additional steps. But the damage to public confidence in the investigation's DNA handling was already done. Step 4. The challenges. Sheriff Nanos revealed that the lab had reported challenges with the DNA sample. He did not elaborate. Sources close to the investigation told CBS News that the DNA recovered from Nancy Guthrie's home may be low-level, meaning there was not enough genetic material present to generate a clean, reliable profile for database comparison. Another source described the sample as potentially insufficient for CODIS, or genetic genealogy analysis without significant enhancement. CeCe Moore, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon, one of the nation's leading forensic labs, offered a note of cautious optimism.
We've had success with a lot of cases with mixtures, but it does take a little more time because there's an extra step. After that profile is created for genetic genealogy, the bioinformatics scientists have to work on that file to extract out the suspect's DNA. She added, "The discovery of mixed DNA makes me hopeful, because that does seem more likely to be definitively tied to the kidnapper." Then came the detail that added an entirely new and deeply unsettling dimension to the DNA story. ABC News confirmed that the FBI had reached out to Mexican authorities as part of the investigation, not because there is evidence Nancy Guthrie was taken to Mexico, but because Tucson sits just 60 miles from the border, and investigators are exploring every possibility. And here is why that detail matters specifically to the DNA evidence. CeCe Moore, the nation's leading genetic genealogist, told ABC News directly that if the suspect has deep roots in Mexico or Latin America, the genetic genealogy process will take significantly longer. The 3 law enforcement accessible genealogy databases, GetMatch Pro and Family Tree DNA, combined contain approximately 2 million DNA profiles. The 3 largest consumer databases, which contain over 50 million profiles, have barred law enforcement from accessing their data. If the suspect's family is not represented in those 2 million accessible profiles, investigators may need a court order to access the larger databases. Moore said she predicts the process in the Guthrie case won't take more than weeks, maybe months, but she acknowledged that population group and luck are the 2 factors that determine the timeline. Second question. The 3 largest DNA databases, containing over 50 million profiles, have barred law enforcement access. Do you think those companies should be required to cooperate with investigators in active kidnapping cases? Tell me what you think in the comments. The public response to the DNA challenges was one of the most emotionally charged moments in this entire case. Online communities erupted, some expressing frustration at what they perceived as investigative mismanagement, others defending the sheriff's cautious approach. The Oathroom controversy dominated true crime forums for days, with many arguing that the decision to bypass Quantico and the nation's top genetic genealogy lab may have cost investigators critical time in an active kidnapping where every hour matters. Others pointed to a detail that Sheriff Nanos mentioned almost in passing, that a photo appeared to show the suspect wearing a ring. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News, "I look at the same photo you look at and I see it." The ring detail has since consumed online communities, with amateur sleuths cross-referencing the image against thousands of potential matches. My personal opinion? The DNA challenges are real, but they are not fatal to this investigation. Mixed DNA is difficult, low-level DNA is difficult, but difficult is not impossible. The same science that pulled a usable profile from a knife sheath in Idaho, from a Q-tip in a trash can in Pennsylvania, and from a decades-old rape kit in California is being applied to this evidence right now. The question is not whether the science can do it, the question is whether the sample is sufficient. And until that lab in Florida delivers a definitive answer, investigators are working every other lead simultaneously. The Walmart purchases, the cell tower data, the digital map of the Wi-Fi outages, the ring on the suspect's finger, the Bitcoin blockchain, the ransom note forensic linguistics. This investigation has more threads than almost any case I have ever followed. And threads, when pulled carefully enough, always lead somewhere. Forensic geneticists who have studied the Nancy Guthrie DNA evidence publicly note that the mixed DNA profile presents both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is separation. Extracting a single suspect's genetic profile from a sample containing multiple contributors requires advanced bioinformatics techniques that add time and complexity to the analysis. The opportunity is this. Mixed DNA that contains the suspect's genetic material is often more definitively tied to that individual than a single source sample that could theoretically have innocent explanations. CeCe Moore put it plainly, if they can separate the suspect's profile from the mixture, it will be among the strongest pieces of evidence in the entire case. And forensic genetic genealogy, once that profile exists, does not require the suspect to have ever taken a DNA test themselves. It only requires one relative, a parent, a sibling, a cousin, even a distant relative, to have voluntarily submitted their DNA to any of the accessible databases. One relative, anywhere in the genealogy tree, and the science builds backward until it arrives at a name. No autopsy is applicable. Nancy Guthrie has not been found. The DNA remains under active analysis at the Florida lab. Investigators have confirmed they are simultaneously exploring genetic genealogy options and have not ruled out seeking court-ordered access to the larger consumer DNA databases if the accessible databases fail to produce a match. The glove DNA produced no CODIS hit. The blood confirmed at the scene belongs to Nancy. The suspect's DNA, if it exists cleanly within the mixed samples, remains the single most powerful piece of physical evidence in this entire investigation. As of today, March 11, 2026, the lab has not delivered a final conclusion on the sample's usability. And here's the question I need you to sit with tonight, the one that forensic scientists, former FBI agents, and genetic genealogists all acknowledge, but nobody has said directly on camera. If this suspect was sophisticated enough to use a possible Wi-Fi jammer, rehearse the crime digitally, wear gloves, cover the camera, and plan every detail of this operation in advance, is it possible they also knew enough about DNA evidence to deliberately leave a contaminated, mixed, or low-level sample? And if the answer is yes, what does that tell us about exactly who we are looking for? Drop everything you are thinking in the comments right now. Do you think the DNA will eventually crack this case? Do you think the decision to send evidence to Florida instead of Quantico was a mistake? And do you believe the suspect deliberately compromised the DNA sample? I read every single comment. This conversation matters more than you know. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, please contact the FBI immediately at 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million and the FBI is offering $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's safe return.